I knew something was wrong the moment I opened my backpack. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a certainty, the kind that sits heavy in your stomach before your brain catches up. The assignment was gone. 3 weeks of astrophysics calculations. Orbital mechanics, gravitational variance modeling, plasma drift corrections, everything I had stayed up for, everything I had rewritten twice because Professor Hale demanded precision beyond civilian standards. It was supposed to be perfect. Instead, there was nothing. Only ash. And a few curled fragments of paper clinging to the inside lining of my bag like burned leaves after a fire. I slowly reached in and pulled one out. The edges crumbled between my fingers. Not torn. Not damaged by water. Burned. Cleanly. Precisely. Like it had been exposed to a controlled burst of extreme heat. My throat tightened. Behind me, the classroom was already alive with the usual noise, chairs scraping, holoslates booting up, cadets arguing over derivation steps they definitely hadn't finished last night. The academy never paused for failure. It only recorded it. And failure, in Professor Hale's class, was permanent. I turned my head slowly toward my desk. That's when I saw him. Ember. My dragon hatchling. He was curled up like he owned the place, perched half inside my open backpack like it was a nest. His small wings twitched occasionally, glowing faintly along the edges like embers trapped under glass. Tiny horns, barely starting to curve, caught the classroom light. His scales shimmered between deep charcoal and molten orange depending on how he moved. And he was chewing something. Slowly. Thoughtfully. Like he was reviewing the taste. I stared. Ember, I whispered. He paused mid-chew. Looked at me. Then swallowed. A tiny puff of smoke escaped his nostrils like a satisfied sigh. I leaned closer, heart already sinking. What are you eating? He blinked. Then proudly nudged something toward me with his snout. A scrap of paper. Blackened at the edges. Still faintly readable in the middle. My handwriting. Equation lines. A half-melted graph of orbital decay curves. My homework. My entire grade for the cycle. My voice dropped. No. No, 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 Ember. He tilted his head as if I was being dramatic. Then, completely unbothered, he burped. A small spark flickered out of his mouth and died in the air before it could touch anything. A second later, the air near my backpack felt warmer. Too warm. That's when I noticed the inside lining wasn't just scorched. It was vitrified. As if something had briefly turned it into glass. A chill ran down my spine. Ember stretched like nothing was wrong, claws clicking softly against the metal frame of the desk. He made a happy little chirping sound and curled tighter into the backpack like it was the most comfortable place in the galaxy. Behind me, someone laughed. Ro, did your pet eat your homework or did you just fail spectacularly? I didn't answer. Because Professor Hale had just walked into the classroom. The room changed instantly. Noise died mid-sentence. Even the holoslate seemed to dim slightly, like the system itself recognized authority had entered. Professor Hale didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. He was the kind of man whose silence carried more weight than most people's threats. He stopped at the front of the room. Scanned us once. Then his eyes locked onto me. Cadet Ro, he said calmly, present your assignment. My hands went cold. Slowly, I stood. Behind me, Ember shifted. Just slightly. Like he was waking up. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out at first. Then I forced the words. Sir, it's not here. A pause. Too long. Professor Hale's gaze sharpened. Explain. I hesitated. Because how do you explain that? How do you tell a man trained in orbital warfare theory and xenobiological containment that your illegal dragon hatchling might have accidentally incinerated 3 weeks of high-level coursework? I tried anyway. It's complicated. Hale's eyes narrowed a fraction. Complicated how, exactly? A soft sound came from my backpack. A content little rumble. Ember shifted again. And then, completely without warning, he lifted his head above the edge of the bag. In his mouth was another piece of paper. Still intact. Still faintly glowing at the edges. He looked at me, proud, and dropped it onto my desk. Right in front of Professor Hale. The classroom went dead silent. Even breathing felt illegal. Professor Hale stared at the paper. Then at Ember. Then back at the paper. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture did. A subtle tightening, like a soldier recognizing an unexpected weapon on the battlefield. That, he said slowly, is classified thermal-resistant academic substrate. Ember chirped happily. And ate the rest of it. Right in front of him. The moment Ember swallowed the last piece of my homework, the classroom stopped being a classroom. It became a containment zone pretending to be one. No one moved. No one even breathed normally. Professor Hale's eyes stayed locked on Ember, but his attention had clearly expanded beyond him, past the desk, past me, into whatever category of problem this now belonged to. I could feel it. The shift. The reclassification. From student disciplinary issue to security incident. I swallowed hard. Ember, completely unaware of the geopolitical consequences of his chewing habits, licked his lips and settled deeper into my backpack like it was a throne. Professor Hale finally spoke. "Cadet Rowe," he said, voice level, controlled, "step away from your desk." That was not a request. That was protocol. I hesitated anyway. Because stepping away meant leaving Ember exposed. And something about the way the room had gone quiet made me certain that if I left him, someone else would decide what happened next, and I didn't like the odds of that decision. "I can explain," I said quickly. Hale didn't look at me. "You will." I glanced down at Ember. He blinked up at me innocently. Then let out a tiny puff of smoke, like he was bored of the conversation already. I exhaled slowly. "Sir, it's a hatchling." That got his attention. Finally. Professor Hale's gaze snapped back to me. "Repeat that." My throat tightened. "It's a dragon hatchling." A murmur rippled through the class. Someone dropped a stylus. It hit the floor like a gunshot in the silence. Hale took one step closer. "That is not possible." Ember chose that exact moment to crawl out of my backpack and onto the desk. He stretched. Small wings flaring. Tiny claws clicking on metal. Then he sat down directly on my half-burned assignment and looked around the room like he was evaluating the seating arrangement. One cadet whispered, "That's not a registered xenofauna class." Another answered, "That's not even supposed to exist off-world." Professor Hale raised a hand slightly, and the room shut up again instantly. His voice dropped lower. Controlled. Dangerous in a different way now. "Cadet Rowe," he said, "where did you obtain a bonded fire drake hatchling?" Ember chirped at the word bonded, as if it was his favorite compliment. I hesitated. Because the truth sounded even worse out loud than it did in my head. "I didn't obtain him," I said carefully. "He chose me." That was the wrong answer. I could see it in Hale's eyes. A shift from confusion to alarm. "Chose you," he repeated flatly. Ember sneezed. A tiny spark shot out and burned a clean circle into the edge of my desk. The metal didn't melt. It just disappeared. Like it had never been there. A technician in the back of the room muttered, "That's impossible thermal displacement." Professor Hale stepped closer to Ember. Slowly. Carefully. Like approaching an unexploded device. "Cadet Rowe," he said without looking away from Ember, "call it off." I blinked. "Call what off?" "The bonding behavior." I stared. "I don't control that." Ember chirped again, clearly offended at the implication. Hale's eyes narrowed. "Everything bonds. Everything responds to stimulus, conditioning, containment protocols." Ember opened his mouth. A small glow built inside. Instantly, every cadet in the front row leaned back in their chairs. Including me. "Ember, don't," I started. Too late. He sneezed. It wasn't a fireball. It wasn't an explosion. It was worse. A precise, compressed pulse of heat and light that hit the professor's datapad mid-sentence. The device didn't break. It didn't burn. It simply stopped existing. There was a moment of silence where even physics seemed unsure how to proceed. Professor Hale slowly looked down at his now empty hand. Then at Ember. Then at me. The room temperature dropped. "You will stand down," he said quietly. That's when the Academy alarm system triggered. Not the normal one. The deep one. The kind used for structural breaches, unauthorized weapon detection, or containment failures. Red light flooded the room. Metal shutters began sliding down over the windows. Someone shouted, "WHY is the classroom locking down?" A voice echoed over the intercom. "Attention. Xenobiological anomaly detected. Initiating containment protocol." Ember looked up at the lights. Curious. Then very, very excited. And that was when I realized something horrifying. This wasn't about my homework anymore. It was about what they thought Ember was. And what they were going to do to prove it. The lockdown doors finished sealing with a final hydraulic thunk that echoed through the classroom like a verdict. For a moment, nobody moved. Red emergency lights strobed across every surface, turning faces into flickering silhouettes, students frozen mid-breath, Professor Hale standing like a statue of judgment, and Ember sitting on my desk like he'd just attended a mildly interesting lecture. Then the reality of it hit all at once. A cadet near the back whispered, "We're in containment protocol." Another voice answered, shakier, "That's for bioclassified threats." Professor Hale didn't react to the panic building behind him. His attention stayed fixed on Ember, as if the entire room had been downgraded to background noise. The intercom crackled again. Containment Unit Gamma responding. Maintain distance from anomaly. Do not engage. That was when I saw them. Outside the classroom window, before the shutters fully sealed, shadows moved across the corridor. Armored silhouettes. Not academy security. Not normal faculty response teams. These were specialists. The kind that didn't show up unless something had already been classified as dangerous enough to erase quietly. My stomach tightened. Ember tilted his head at the sound of marching boots in the hallway. His tail flicked once, curious. "Ember," I whispered. He chirped softly in response. Too happy. Too unaware. Professor Hale finally spoke, voice clipped and precise. "Cadet Rowe. You are to remove the specimen from the premises immediately." I blinked. "Sir, I can't just." "That was not a suggestion," he cut in. Ember chose that moment to hop off the desk. Right onto the floor. The metal floor. He landed lightly, almost proudly, like he was testing gravity for the first time. A technician near the door immediately stepped forward. "Do not approach," Hale said sharply. Too late. Ember padded forward a few steps, sniffing the air. His small claws clicked against the floor plates. Each step left a faint glow that faded a second later, like heat being rewritten instead of absorbed. The technician stopped. "Ah. Professor," the tech said. "Thermal readings are spiking but, no material damage detected." Another voice responded through comms, distant and urgent. "That's impossible. Confirm sensor integrity." "I'm telling you," the technician insisted, "the floor is registering exposure to extreme energy output but remains structurally unchanged." Ember sneezed again. A spark flickered out, hit the floor, and vanished. No burn mark. No crater. Just, absence of data where the system expected destruction. Professor Hale's jaw tightened. "This is not a normal xenofauna response pattern," he said quietly. Ember chirped, as if agreeing. Then he looked at the armored figures now visible through the sealed glass. And wagged his tail. One of them raised a containment device, something angular and metallic, humming with faint blue light. "Deploying suppression field," the voice outside announced. The device activated. A low-frequency pulse filled the room. I felt it in my bones more than I heard it. Ember paused. Tilted his head. And then, completely unfazed, sat down directly in the middle of the suppression field. Nothing happened. The device beeped. Once. Then twice. Then went silent. A beat of confusion passed through the outside team. "Field failure," someone demanded. "No," another voice replied. "Target is not responding to suppression parameters." Professor Hale stepped forward slightly, eyes narrowing. "What exactly is that creature?" he asked, not to me anymore, but to the room itself. No one answered. Because nobody had an answer that didn't sound like a mistake. Ember looked up at me again. Then at Hale. Then, inexplicably, at the emergency lights overhead. He sneezed. This time, the effect was different. The red emergency lighting flickered. Once. Then shifted. From red. To amber. A system alert tone chimed, confused. Then stopped entirely. The lockdown message on the intercom glitched mid-sentence. Containment status. Recalibrating, anomaly class Reese. Static. The entire system froze for half a second. Then rebooted. A calm voice replaced the alarm. Alert resolved. No active threat detected. Stand down. Silence. Everyone stared at the ceiling speaker like it had just betrayed them. Outside the glass, the armored team froze mid-motion. One of them said slowly, "That's not standard protocol override." Professor Hale's expression changed for the first time. Not anger. Not control. Calculation. He turned slightly toward the wall terminal and tapped his wrist device. "Academy Command," he said. "Request immediate classification override for xenobiological subject in classroom 3 to 17. A pause. Then a response crackled back. "Denied." Hale's eyes narrowed. "On what grounds?" The reply came almost instantly. Subject already classified beyond Academy jurisdiction. That line landed like a dropped weapon. Beyond Academy jurisdiction meant one thing. They weren't in charge anymore. Nobody here was. Ember yawned. Completely unaware that he had just overwritten institutional authority systems with a sneeze. And that was when I realized something even worse than the lockdown. The Academy wasn't trying to protect us from Ember. They were trying to protect Ember from being noticed. And they had just failed. The Academy didn't waste time once jurisdiction was denied. That was the part that scared me most. Not Ember. Not even the lockdown systems glitching under his presence. It was how fast the institution decided to act anyway. The classroom doors didn't open. They were cut. A thin line of blue-white energy traced the seams, and the metal panels separated with surgical precision. No sparks. No noise. Just controlled disassembly, like the room itself was being rewritten piece by piece. Through the opening, the containment unit stepped in. 6 figures this time. Armored. Marked. No Academy insignia anymore, just blank geometric symbols that meant authorized removal. Behind them came a floating device, spherical and humming, projecting a faint gravitational distortion field that bent the air around it. Ember stood up immediately. Curious. Excited. I, on the other hand, stepped back from my desk without thinking. Professor Hale didn't. He moved forward instead. Stand down, Hale ordered the containment unit sharply. This is an Academy-controlled incident. The lead figure didn't respond at first. Then a distorted voice came through a speaker built into the helmet. Classification override confirmed. Academy authority revoked. Subject is now extra-jurisdictional. Hale's jaw tightened. On whose authority? A pause. Then, non-planetary oversight directive. That did it. Even Hale hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. Ember tilted his head at the floating device, watching it rotate slowly in the air. The gravitational field made dust rise from the floor in lazy spirals. He sneezed softly. A tiny spark hit the field. And the field stuttered. Not collapsed. Not failed. Just blinked. Like reality had missed a step. The containment unit froze. Energy anomaly detected, one of them reported. Recalibrating suppression vector, another replied. Ember chirped happily. Then took one step forward. The floating device reacted instantly. It fired. A net of shimmering energy unfolded mid-air, designed to bind, suppress, neutralize. It never reached him. Ember opened his mouth. Not wide. Just enough. And the net disappeared inside him like it had never existed. Silence hit the room again. One of the containment soldiers took a half-step back. That was a phase entanglement restraint grid, someone muttered. Ember burped. A faint glow flickered out. The floating device outside the net suddenly dropped altitude, alarm screaming as its stabilization failed. Professor Hale turned sharply toward me. Cadet Rowe, he said low, controlled, you need to remove that creature from this room now. I shook my head. I told you, I can't control him. Hale's eyes hardened. Then you are not fit to possess it. Before I could respond, he moved. Fast. Too fast. He crossed the distance between us and Ember in 3 steps. Professor, wait. I shouted. But he was already reaching out. Not to attack. To grab. To restrain. To take control like he always did, with authority, with certainty, with the assumption that systems obeyed him. He grabbed Ember. And for a second. Nothing happened. Ember froze. Looked up at him. Blinking. Confused. Then Ember did something I had never seen before. He opened his mouth again. Not like before. Wider. Deeper. And the air around him warped. Professor Hale's expression changed instantly. For the first time since I'd met him, I saw uncertainty in his face. Release, he started. Too late. The containment field outside flickered violently. The floating suppression device emitted a sharp warning tone and began drifting toward Ember as if pulled by gravity itself. Hale tried to let go. But his hand didn't move. His wrist device flashed red. Field interaction detected, one of the soldiers shouted. Ember chirped again. Happy. Like this was a game. The air snapped. Not loudly. Not violently. Just suddenly wrong. Professor Hale's body jerked forward. And in the same instant, the containment device and Hale both crossed the same invisible threshold. There was no explosion. No burn. No scream. Just a brief distortion in the air, like a lens bending light too far. And then emptiness. Silence. Where Professor Hale had been standing, there was nothing. Not even a mark on the floor. The containment device vanished with him. The soldier units froze completely. One voice, quiet now, subject absorbed containment officer. Another corrected, even quieter, correction, subject absorbed target interaction field. Ember closed his mouth, blinking. Then looked around the room like nothing unusual had happened. He chirped softly. And sat down. On my desk again. Like he was waiting for me to continue my homework. My hands were shaking. I couldn't move. The containment soldiers didn't advance anymore. They didn't retreat either. They just stood there. Watching Ember. Watching me. Because something had just been proven beyond doubt. Whatever Ember was. He didn't just destroy things. He removed them from the rules entirely. And Professor Hale, the man who had controlled every moment of this room, was gone. The room didn't react immediately after Professor Hale disappeared. It couldn't. It was like the Academy itself needed time to accept that something it considered controlled space had just lost one of its highest authority instructors without a trace. Then the silence broke. Not with panic. With procedure. A cold mechanical tone echoed through the classroom speakers. Containment protocol elevated to Omega classification. All non-essential personnel remain stationary. External intervention teams deployed. The words should have meant order. Instead, they felt like a countdown. Ember was still sitting on my desk. Calm. Tail gently flicking. Like none of this mattered. Like disappearing a professor mid-reach was just part of normal hatchling behavior. I, on the other hand, couldn't feel my legs properly. My hands were still shaking from where Hale had vanished. The spot on the floor where he stood looked exactly the same as everything else. No scorch marks, no distortion, no evidence at all that a human being had ever existed there. That was the worst part. No trace meant no recovery. Only removal. Outside the shattered doorway, the containment units had stopped advancing. Even they seemed to understand the rules had changed again. One of them spoke quietly over comms. We've lost a faculty member. Another replied, confirmed. No residual energy signature. A third voice, sharper now, do not repeat. Do not broadcast internally. Command requires discretion. Discretion. That word didn't belong in a situation like this. Ember tilted his head at the soldiers outside the door. Then chirped. One of them flinched. Just slightly. Like they were afraid he might notice fear itself. I stepped forward slowly. Ember, I whispered. He turned toward me immediately. That was the strange part. No hesitation. No delay. Like I was the only stable reference point in a collapsing system. I crouched beside the desk, keeping my voice low. You can't keep doing that, I said. Ember blinked. Then sneezed lightly. A tiny spark hit the floor and vanished harmlessly. He looked proud. I swallowed hard. No, that's not good. That's not helping. Ember chirped again, softer this time. As if confused. Outside, the containment leader raised a hand. Target is non-hostile posture confirmed, they said. However, cognitive unpredictability remains extreme. A pause. Then the voice continued, colder. Primary objective updated, secure or neutralize anomaly. The word neutralize made my stomach drop. Ember perked up at the shift in tone. He could sense intent. Not words. Intent. The air in the room subtly changed. Not temperature. Not pressure. Expectation. I stood up quickly. Don't escalate this. He's not attacking anyone. No response. The containment unit leader stepped forward. Slowly. Carefully. Like they were walking into gravity that didn't behave correctly. They raised a compact device, smaller than the previous one. More refined. Less obvious. Ember watched it. Still calm. Still curious. But the glow along his wings deepened slightly. I noticed it. The room noticed it. Even the soldiers noticed it. Suppression lattice active, the leader announced. The device activated. And for a brief second, I felt something like pressure press against the room, not physical, but conceptual, like the space between thoughts had been tightened. Ember didn't move. Didn't react. Just stared. Then he looked at me. As if asking a question. Not what is that? But is that allowed? I opened my mouth. No, I said quickly. Just don't respond. Too late. The device emitted its field. A geometric shimmer unfolded through the air, forming a cage-like structure of light. And then, Ember exhaled. Not fire. Not explosion. Something quieter. The lattice bent. Not broke. Not failed. Bent, like it had suddenly become uncertain whether it should exist in that shape at all. The soldiers froze. Field instability increasing, one said. Recalibrating, another started. But the system never finished. Because Ember stood up. And took one step forward. The lattice collapsed inward. Not outward. Inward. Like it had been folded into a point that no longer existed in this version of reality. The suppression device went silent. Then disappeared entirely. No flash. No sound. Just absence. The leader stepped back instantly. A rare mistake. Fear. Real fear. Now visible. Across trained operators. And that's when the Academy's command channel opened again, but this time, it wasn't procedural. It was direct. A single voice, older than the others, filtered through every speaker in the room. Cease engagement. The entire corridor outside went still. Then the voice continued. Repeat. Cease engagement. Asset classification updated. I froze. Asset. Not threat. Not anomaly. Asset. Ember tilted his head at the ceiling speaker. Listening. The voice finished. Subject is no longer under Academy authority. Transfer protocol initiated. A pause. Then the final line. Do not provoke bonding response. Ember chirped softly at that last phrase. Like he understood it. Better than they did. And for the first time since this started, I realized the Academy wasn't deciding what to do about Ember. They were deciding what to do about me.